St. Anne's Children's Medical Center in Boston never truly slept. Even in the early hours of the morning, corridors remained illuminated by cold lamps, reflecting an almost impersonal glow on the waxed floors. The constant sound of heart monitors, hurried footsteps, and automatic doors creating a mechanical back and forth made up a routine that, for those who worked there, had already become invisible. For those arriving for the first time, however, the atmosphere had a weight difficult to explain, as if each wall held stories that no one wanted to hear. That night, room 317 was different. There, the silence was uncomfortable. He was pressing down. In the center of the room, a hospital crib surrounded by tubes, wires, and equipment supported a baby of only 6 months. Little Noah Miller seemed too light to carry so much responsibility. His chest rose and fell with effort, each breath drawn with difficulty, as if air were a favor granted, not a natural right. Beside the crib, Emily Miller had stood for hours. She wouldn't sit up. She wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were fixed on her son, attentive to every slightest movement, every imperceptible change in the sound of the machines. Her hair, haphazardly tied back, betrayed days without rest. Her trembling hands held a medical chart, already crumpled from being opened and closed so many times. 15 names were listed there, 15 doctors, 15 renowned specialists from different hospitals with extensive resumes and awards adorning their office walls. All had analyzed exams, reviewed images, discussed protocols. All had used excessive technical jargon to soften the same brutal conclusion. We don't know what to do. Noah's condition didn't follow any known patterns. It didn't fit into manuals. It didn't obey statistics. His respiratory system would collapse without a clear cause. His oxygen levels would plummet unpredictably, and his heart would react as if it were always on the verge of giving up. Medications would work for hours, sometimes minutes, and then stop working as if the baby's body had learned to reject them. Emily had lost count of how many times she had heard phrases like, "It's rare," "I've never seen anything like it," or "We are doing everything we can." However, what was possible was no longer enough. On the other side of the room, leaning against the door, was Daniel Carter. He wasn't wearing a white coat. He didn't carry a stethoscope around his neck. His name tag didn't display lengthy titles or medical specializations. Yet there was something about his posture that contrasted with the surroundings. He observed silently, attentive not only to the monitors, but to the baby itself, to the irregular rhythm of its breathing, to the way its tiny fingers twitched involuntarily. Daniel was not a doctor, at least not officially. He worked as a clinical technician in a less prestigious wing of the hospital, responsible for equipment maintenance and examination support. He rarely entered rooms like that one. People like him weren't called upon for critical decisions, much less to discuss complex diagnoses, and yet it was he who had broken the silence. "I can save your baby." The sentence wasn't delivered in a heroic tone. There was no drama. It was almost a whisper, as if Daniel were talking more to himself than to Emily. Even so, the impact was immediate. Emily turned slowly, as if afraid to hear something she shouldn't. Her eyes met his, a mixture of disbelief and despair. "What?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Daniel took a deep breath before continuing. He knew those words crossed an invisible line. He knew they could cost him his job, maybe something worse. "I know I'm not one of the doctors. I know this will sound absurd. But I've seen something similar before. Not exactly the same, but similar enough." Emily let out a short, humorless laugh. 15 doctors looked at him, he said, holding up the medical record. 15 specialists. "And they all said there's no solution." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know. I heard the meetings. I saw the tests." He moved a little closer to the crib, keeping a respectful distance. "They're treating the right symptoms, just the wrong way." The sentence fell like a weight in the air. Emily felt her heart race. Part of her wanted to throw him out of the room, call security, end that absurd conversation. Another part, the bigger, more desperate part, clung to any possibility, no matter how small. "Who are you?" he asked. "Daniel Carter. I've worked here for 7 years." He hesitated for a moment. "Before that, I spent 3 years volunteering at an independent research center. Nothing that shows up in official records." Emily narrowed her eyes. "So, why doesn't anyone else know about this?" Daniel looked away for a brief moment. "Because what I learned there isn't something hospitals like to acknowledge. It doesn't generate protocols. It doesn't fit into statistics." He looked back at the baby. "But it works." An alarm suddenly sounded. One of the monitors indicated a sharp drop in oxygen saturation. Nurses rushed into the room, adjusting equipment, following automated procedures. Emily recoiled, pressing her hands against her chest, panic returning in full force. Daniel watched everything in silence, but his expression had changed. It wasn't fear. It was urgency. Once the situation stabilized, a doctor came in soon after, reviewed the data, and left with a tired sigh, muttering something about another unexpected crisis. The room fell silent again. Daniel stepped forward. "This will continue to happen," she said firmly, "until his body can't take it anymore." Emily felt her legs go weak. She held onto the crib to keep from falling. "Then speak," he said, almost pleading. "Tell me what you think you know." Daniel hesitated for only a second before answering. "The problem isn't in the lungs, nor in the heart. It's in what nobody is looking at, because nobody expects to find something like this in a baby." Emily swallowed hard. "What?" Daniel leaned slightly forward, lowering his voice. "His nervous system is reacting as if it's under constant threat, as if it's fighting to survive something invisible." He paused. "And if I'm right, there's still a chance. Small, but real." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was something new there. Not complete hope, not blind trust. It was something more dangerous. It was the willingness to risk everything. Dawn arrived in Boston without ceremony. The grey light streamed through the tall windows of St. Anne's Hospital, blurring the line between night and day. For those hurrying through the corridors, it was just another ordinary morning. For Emily Miller, it was the continuation of a nightmare that respected no clocks. She hadn't left room 317 since her conversation with Daniel Carter. She slept sitting up, her body bent uncomfortably in the chair next to the crib, waking at every slight variation in the monitor's sounds. The hospital had become a closed world, where time didn't move forward, it only repeated itself. When Daniel returned hours later, he was carrying an untouched cup of coffee. His eyes betrayed that he hadn't slept either. He surveyed the room before entering completely, as if he were invading a space that didn't belong to him. Emily noticed his presence even before he spoke. "You're back," he said, without turning his face away. "I told you I'd be back," he replied in a low voice. Daniel leaned against the window, keeping his distance from the crib. He didn't want to seem intrusive. He knew that his every gesture was being measured, weighed, analyzed by a mother who had already heard too many promises. "They won't like this," Emily said, finally looking at him. "If they find out we're talking—" "I know," Daniel interrupted. "That's why we need to be quick and discreet." At that time, the hospital functioned like a perfectly tuned machine. Teams rotated shifts, reports were passed from hand to hand, decisions were made in closed rooms by people who rarely looked patients directly in the eye. It was an efficient but rigid system. Anything that deviated from protocol was treated as a threat. Daniel knew this structure well. For 7 years, he had watched brilliant doctors silenced for suggesting alternative approaches. He had seen research shelved for not producing replicable results. At St. Anne's, only those who adapted survived. Emily, on the other hand, came from a completely different world. Before all that, she was a preschool teacher at a public school on the outskirts of Cambridge. She lived a simple, predictable routine. Planned pregnancy, smooth delivery, first months marked by sleepless nights and an overwhelming love. Until the day Noah stopped breathing for a few seconds in his crib at home. The first hospitalization lasted only 2 days, the second, a week, the third, a whole month. Each return to the hospital was longer, more tense, and filled with more unanswered questions. "They ask me if there's a family history," Emily said, breaking the silence. "As if I've been hiding something, as if it's my fault." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. "They need a clear cause," he said, "something they can name. Without it, they're lost." "And you?" she retorted. "Do you have a name for that?" Daniel hesitated, not because I didn't know what to answer, but because I knew the weight that answer carried. "I have a hypothesis," he said finally, "and that's all I can offer right now." He approached the small side table and took a worn notebook from his pocket, filled with handwritten notes. They weren't official charts or printed reports. They were personal observations, scribbles made over the years. "When I worked at the research center," he began, "we dealt with cases that traditional hospitals rejected, conditions that didn't fit into any specific specialty. Many patients came after hearing exactly what you heard. We did everything that was possible." Emily watched his every move as if trying to decide whether it was hope or madness. "In some cases," Daniel continued, "the problem wasn't with the affected organ, but with the control system. It was the way the brain interpreted basic bodily signals: pain, breathing, alertness." He discreetly pointed at Noah. "His body is in a constant state of emergency. It's as if something is telling his brain that he needs to fight all the time." "But against what?" Emily asked, almost in a whisper. Daniel closed the notebook. "Against something that no longer exists, or that never actually existed." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. "That doesn't make sense." "I know," he replied. "And that's why nobody is looking at that possibility." Before she could say anything, the door to the room opened. The head nurse, Susan Reynolds, entered with a tablet in her hands. Her gaze swept around the room and lingered on Daniel for far too long. "Can I help you with anything?" he asked, with rehearsed cordiality. "Just a quick visit," Daniel replied, taking a step back. Susan nodded, but her eyes said otherwise. That presence had not gone unnoticed. When the nurse left, Emily released the air trapped in her lungs. "They are watching," he said. "I was expecting this," Daniel replied. "That's why, if we're going to move forward, it can't be here. Not officially." Emily felt the weight of that statement. "You're asking me to go against the entire hospital," he said. "No," Daniel corrected. "I'm asking you to decide if you trust me more than their silence." Emily looked at her son again. Noah seemed calm at that moment, but she had already learned that this calmness was temporary, fragile, deceptive. "If you're wrong," she began, "then you will have done what none of them did," Daniel added. "Tried something different." The hospital continued to function around them, indifferent to the decision that was slowly forming in that room. Emily closed her eyes for a moment. When he opened them, Daniel realized that something had changed. "Tell us what we need to do," she said. Emily's decision did not bring immediate relief. On the contrary, the moment the words, "Tell us what we need to do." As their lips parted, a new tension settled in the room. It was no longer just the fear of losing their son. Now there was the risk of losing control of the situation, of crossing a line of no return. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He approached the crib, observing Noah with clinical attention, but without touching him. The monitors indicated temporary stability, a fragile interval between crises. "First of all," he said, "we need to confirm if my hypothesis makes sense, and that requires something the hospital won't authorize." Emily felt her stomach clench. What exactly? An advanced neurological response test, Daniel replied. Not the standard protocol, something experimental. She frowned. Experimental-like? No official registration, no committee approval. He looked directly at her. If it goes wrong, no one but us will know we tried. Emily took a step back. You're talking about playing with my son's life behind his back. Daniel did not defend himself. I'm talking about doing something that 15 doctors are unwilling to do because it doesn't fit into their system. Before she could respond, a new alarm sounded. Higher pitched this time. Noah's oxygen level dropped rapidly, as if someone had switched something off inside him. The medical team entered in seconds. Masks, adjustments, quick commands. Emily was taken away, watching everything with her heart racing. Daniel remained still, his eyes fixed on the baby, mentally counting the seconds. This crisis lasted longer than previous ones. When she finally stabilized, the on-call doctor, Dr. Howard Levin, remained in the room longer than usual. His expression was tense. "We need to talk," he said to Emily, leading her a few steps away from the crib. Daniel was left behind, invisible once more. "Noah's condition is worsening," Levin continued. "We're reaching a critical point. If there's another crisis like this in the next few hours—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Then do something different," Emily said, her voice too firm for someone on the verge of a breakdown. Levin sighed. "We've already reached the limit of what current medicine allows." Emily felt a warmth rise in her chest. For the first time in weeks, she didn't cry. "No," he said. "You've reached the limit of what you're willing to try." The doctor stared at her, surprised by her tone. "With all due respect, Emily, comments like that aren't helpful." "Then stop repeating the same words while my son is dying," she replied. The silence that followed was heavy. Levin walked away shortly after, clearly irritated. Daniel approached as soon as the doctor left. "Now you understand," he said. Emily nodded slowly. "What do you need?" Daniel took a deep breath. "I need to take him to the neuroimaging room in the middle of the night for a few minutes. No recording. I need to observe how his brain reacts to specific stimuli." "Stimuli?" Emily repeated. "Sounds, light, rhythm." He paused. "Simple things, but applied in the right way. Is this safe?" Daniel hesitated. "Not enough to lie, but enough to be honest. It's less dangerous than continuing as we are." The following hours dragged on. Emily feigned normalcy while the team followed their protocols. Daniel disappeared, preparing everything behind the scenes. The hospital entered its quietest period, when fewer eyes were watching. At 2:17 a.m., Susan Reynolds reappeared in the hallway. "You need to rest," Emily said. "I can stay with him for a few minutes." Emily noticed the quick glance the nurse gave Daniel, who was standing a few meters behind her. That was the sign. With carefully rehearsed movements, Noah was transferred to a portable stretcher. The corridors were too empty for a hospital of that size. Each step seemed too loud. Every automatic door that opened made Emily's heart race. In the neuroimaging room, Daniel took control with a confidence that contrasted with his official position at the hospital. He adjusted equipment, connected additional sensors, and quickly explained what he would be doing. "If anything gets out of control," he said, "we'll stop immediately." Emily held her son's hand, feeling his warm skin, his fragile wrist. Daniel started the test. Soft lights pulsed in specific patterns. Rhythmic sounds filled the room, almost imperceptible. It wasn't anything that could be called aggressive. And yet, something changed. The monitors began to register unprecedented variations. "Do you see this?" Daniel murmured, his eyes fixed on the dice. Noah's brain was reacting, not like in a crisis, in a different way. The chaotic patterns were giving way to something more organized, more coherent. For a few seconds, the baby breathed effortlessly. Emily put her hand to her mouth. "Is he okay?" "He's responding," said Daniel, his voice thick with something close to disbelief. "Just as I expected." The relief was short-lived. A different alarm sounded. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Voices drew closer. "Someone noticed," said Daniel, quickly switching off the stimuli. The door flung open. Susan Reynolds entered, accompanied by 2 security guards and Dr. Levin. "What's going on here?" Levin demanded. Emily instinctively positioned herself in front of the stretcher. "Saving my son," he replied. Levin looked at the monitors, then at Daniel. "You don't have permission to do that." "But it worked," Daniel replied. "For the first time." Levin clenched his teeth. "This ends now." The security guards moved forward. Daniel was pulled away from the control room. Noah began to show signs of instability again, as if his body was sensing the abrupt interruption. Emily screamed. "Look at him," he said. "Did you see what happened?" But the system didn't see isolated results. It only saw violations. Daniel was escorted out of the room. Before the door closed, he stared at Emily. "Now you know it's not impossible," he said. "They won't stop, but neither can we." The door closed. Emily stood there, her son in her arms, surrounded by people who followed rules, while something precious slipped through them. And at that moment, she understood. The real conflict wasn't just against Noah's invisible illness. It was against the very system that refused to see her. Daniel spent the night in a small, windowless room in the hospital's basement. It wasn't an official cell, but it served the same purpose. A security guard stood outside, and Daniel's badge had been temporarily confiscated, a word that in that environment could mean anything. Meanwhile, in room 317, Emily faced an even crueler reality. Now, in addition to Noah's inexplicable condition, there was open distrust from the medical team. Access to the room had become more controlled. Records were kept more rigorously. Every step was observed. The hospital reacted. Dr. Howard Levin called an emergency meeting with the clinical committee that same morning. The incident in the neuroimaging room had been classified as a serious protocol violation, but what really bothered him wasn't the infraction, it was the outcome. "There has been an objective improvement," said a younger neurologist, pointing to data captured before the interruption. "We can't ignore that. We cannot legitimize clandestine procedures," Levin replied curtly. "Today it's an experimental stimulus. What will it be tomorrow?" The debate divided the room. Not out of empathy, but out of risk. The hospital's name, the funding, the academic partnerships. Noah Miller had become an institutional problem. Meanwhile, a silent subplot was unfolding. Susan Reynolds, the head nurse, observed everything from a distance. She had been the first to realize that Daniel wasn't just an overly curious technician. Years before, she had seen something similar at another hospital. A hushed-up case closed without clear explanations. A baby who had improved, and a professional who had disappeared from the system soon after. Susan wasn't rebellious. She'd spent decades following rules, but she wasn't blind either. That afternoon, she quietly entered room 317 while Emily held Noah. "They're thinking of transferring him," Susan said quietly, "to a specialized unit, out of state." Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. When? Within 48 hours. Transfer meant distance. It meant losing all control. It meant never seeing Daniel again. "Is this punishment?" Emily asked. Susan did not answer directly. "They want to close this chapter," he simply said. Meanwhile, Daniel was facing his own battle. Called to testify before the administration, he heard formal charges: insubordination, unauthorized practice, risk to the patient. They never mentioned Noah's positive response to the stimuli. "You've crossed all the lines," Levin said, staring at him. "People like you put everything at risk." "People like me see what you choose to ignore," Daniel replied, without raising his voice. Silence fell immediately. "Your contract will be terminated," Levin announced, "and we will recommend that no other hospital hire you." Daniel nodded. He was expecting it, but there was something they didn't know. Before being escorted out of the building, Daniel managed to hand Susan a small flash drive in the hallway. a quick, almost invisible gesture. "If something happens to me," he murmured. Susan closed her hand around the object. "I know." That night, Emily received an unexpected visitor. Susan entered the room after her shift, out of uniform, without her tablet. "You need to decide quickly," she said. "Transfer or confrontation?" Emily looked at her son. Noah had shown slight improvements since the interrupted test. Not enough to convince doctors, but enough for a mother. "Is there another option?" he asked. Susan took a deep breath. "It exists, but it involves leaving here, on your own, before they do it for you." Emily's eyes widened. "To escape?" "Unregistered voluntary transfer," Susan corrected. "I can open a 2-hour window. After that, I can't help." Emily felt the weight of the choice crushing her. To go against the hospital, against the system, against everything she had been taught to respect. "And Daniel?" he asked. Susan hesitated. "He's already done his part." But Emily didn't believe that. The following morning, while the hospital was preparing the paperwork for the official transfer, something unexpected happened. Noah had a different kind of crisis. It wasn't more intense. It was strange. The patterns on the monitors didn't match any previous crisis. Oxygen saturation dropped, but the heart maintained a steady rhythm. The body reacted in an organized way, as if it were trying to adjust. One resident looked at the data, confused. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. Emily, exhausted, realized something that no one else had noticed. Noah responded better when rhythmic sounds were present. The constant beeping of the monitor in a specific pattern seemed to calm him. That was exactly what Daniel had said. The hospital saw isolated numbers. Emily saw connections. At that moment she made her decision. I wouldn't wait for authorization. I wouldn't ask for permission. If the system couldn't save her son, she would do the unthinkable. And for the first time since Noah's birth, Emily didn't just feel like a desperate mother. There was a real threat to the order that kept failing. Dawn broke heavy over Boston, bringing with it a fine rain that blurred the city lights and muffled the sounds of distant traffic. Inside St. Anne's, the atmosphere was one of deceptive normalcy. Papers circulated, shifts were changed, administrative decisions proceeded, as if nothing were about to collapse. Emily waited. He waited for the hallway to empty. He waited for the footsteps to become more spaced out. He waited for the hospital to enter that peculiar state where everything seems to function automatically. Noah slept in his arms, his face too serene for someone who had been waging a silent battle since birth. At 1:42 a.m., Susan Reynolds appeared at the door of room 317. "Now's the time," he said bluntly. Emily's heart raced. There was no more room for doubt. Susan handed her an incomplete form, deliberately left unsigned. "Voluntary transfer," he explained. "Officially, you decided to leave on your own accord." Emily didn't read it. She signed it. Minutes later, Noah was placed in a portable incubator. Susan led the way, opening doors with her badge. Each door that closed behind them felt like a point of no return. In the underground parking lot, a car waited with its engine running, and leaning against the concrete column was Daniel Carter. Emily stopped abruptly. "You," she began, surprised. "I told you I wasn't going to disappear," he replied. Susan glanced quickly at the two of them. "You have 40 minutes, he said. "After that, I don't know anything." The car left the hospital without sirens, without fanfare. Just a mother, a baby, and a man officially expelled from the medical system. The destination was an old building on the outskirts of Cambridge. Nothing resembling a hospital. Inside, however, makeshift equipment occupied an entire room. It wasn't new. It wasn't certified, but it was organized with almost obsessive precision. "Is this a laboratory?" Emily asked. "That's all that's left of him," Daniel replied. He wasted no time. He adjusted sensors, connected portable monitors, and reproduced the sound stimuli used in the hospital, but this time with more controlled variations. The results were immediate. Noah's breathing became regular. The spasms subsided. For the first time, the baby's body seemed to be cooperating with itself. Emily began to cry silently. "It's working," he murmured. Daniel didn't celebrate. His face was tense. "Not exactly," he said. "You're responding, but that's not what scares me." "So what?" Daniel pointed to the data. "His brain isn't just reacting, it's anticipating." Emily frowned. "Anticipating what?" "Stimuli that haven't happened yet," Daniel replied in a low voice, as if I'd already learned the pattern before even experiencing it. The silence that followed was heavy. "That's impossible," said Emily. "That's what I thought," Daniel replied. He adjusted another parameter, slightly changing the sound rhythm. Noah reacted before the complete change, not as a reflex, as a choice. "He's not just trying to survive," Daniel said. "He's adapting on a level I've never seen before. In a baby, that shouldn't happen." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What's wrong with my son?" Daniel took a while to reply. "I think," he began, "that Noah went through something that forced him to develop an extreme neurological defense mechanism, something we normally only see in adults, subjected to prolonged trauma." "But he's a baby," Emily whispered. "Exactly." Daniel took a step back, as if he were truly seeing Noah for the first time. 15 doctors failed because they were looking for a disease. He took a deep breath. "But this isn't a disease." Emily felt the world tilt. "So what is it?" Daniel stared at her. "That's an answer." Before she could explain further, Susan's phone vibrated. She answered, listening in silence. Her face went pale. "They found out," he said. "The hospital called the police. They're tracking the transfer." Our time became compressed. "How much do we have?" Emily asked. "Minutes," Susan replied. Daniel turned off some equipment. "We need to decide now," he said. "Either we continue, or we turn back and lose everything." Emily looked at Noah. The baby opened his eyes for a brief moment. It wasn't a vacant look. It was focused, present. It was then that Daniel realized something even more disturbing. "Emily," she said, her voice trembling, "he's syncing with you. Like this. His brain patterns change when you're near him." Daniel swallowed hard, as if he's using you as a reference point to regulate his own body. Emily felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The revelation came as a shock. The problem was never just Noah's. The key has always been in the bond between mother and son. Distant sirens began to echo. The turning point had been reached. Nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same as before. The sirens approached rapidly, cutting through the silence of the early morning like a blade. The rain had intensified, beating against the asphalt with enough force to mask hurried footsteps and decisions made on the brink of desperation. "They can't come in here," Emily said, pressing Noah against her chest. "They can," Susan replied, already hanging up the phone. "And they will." Daniel quickly assessed the surroundings. The makeshift laboratory, which for years had served as an intellectual haven, had now become a trap. "We can't just run," he said. "That only confirms what they already believe." "So what do we do?" Emily asked. Daniel took a deep breath. "We faced it, but in the right way." Red and blue lights reflected off the building's walls as the cars pulled up outside. Doors slammed shut, voices overlapped. The tension wasn't just legal, it was moral. Emily felt it clearly. She wasn't running away because she wanted to break rules. She was there because no one had given her another choice. When the police entered, Susan was the first to come forward. "I'm the head nurse at St. Anne's," she said, maintaining a firm posture. "The mother is exercising her right to seek alternative treatment." "Without medical authorization," retorted one of the officers. Daniel took a step forward. "With full consent," he said, and with clinical evidence that the hospital chose to ignore. The confrontation didn't erupt in shouting. It unfolded in tense glances, measured words, and improvised decisions. Meanwhile, Noah began to show signs of stress. His breathing became irregular, and his makeshift sensors beeped. Emily felt panic rising. "He's getting worse," he said. Daniel approached quickly. "No," he replied. "He's reacting to the tension." He asked Emily to sit down and breathe deeply, maintaining eye contact with the baby. As she calmed down, the patterns on the monitors began to stabilize. The police officers watched, confused. "That's no coincidence," Daniel said, pointing to the data. "He's regulating his own body based on his mother's emotional state." An eerie silence filled the room. "If you take him now," Daniel continued, "you'll trigger another cascade of crises, and this time there may be no turning back." The standoff lasted for interminable minutes. Finally, one of the officers spoke on the radio, carefully describing the situation. On the other end, someone was asking questions that no one there could answer simply. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Dr. Levin watched everything unfold through reports and cross-referenced calls. The news wasn't just about insubordination, it was about something far worse. It worked. That threatened more than just protocols, it threatened reputations. "Bring the baby back," Levin ordered. "Now!" But the response he received was not immediate. In the lab, Emily felt something change inside her. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to fear. She was observing, learning. Every time she calmed down, Noah responded. Every time her anxiety increased, the baby's body went on alert. "He's using me as an anchor," she murmured. Daniel nodded. "And you are learning to be that." Susan watched in silence. She knew that, whatever the outcome, none of this would be forgotten. Careers would be destroyed, truths would be buried or exposed. After almost an hour, the decision came. "You'll have more time," said the policeman, putting away the radio. "A judge will be called in the morning. Until then, no one will be forced to leave here." Emily felt her legs weaken. It wasn't a victory. It was just a truce. Daniel turned off some of the equipment. "The consequences are only beginning," he said. "The hospital will react. The media will show up. They won't let this go unpunished." Emily looked at her son, now more stable than he had been in weeks. "Then let them react," she said. "My son is alive." Outside, the rain began to subside. But the real storm was only just beginning to form. The choices made that night had already created ripples that would spread far beyond that unassuming building, and no one there would come out unscathed. The truce granted by the police brought no rest. It only changed the type of battle. Dawn found Emily sitting on the floor of the makeshift laboratory, her back against the cold wall. Noah nestled in her lap. Daniel slept in a nearby chair, exhaustion finally overcoming the continuous vigil. Susan remained awake, observing everything like someone who had already accepted that her life would never return to normal. The judge had authorized a temporary stay of 72 hours. Nothing more, nothing less. A period too short for a definitive cure, long enough to require difficult decisions. Daniel woke up before the sun had fully risen. He observed the monitors, noted patterns, cross-referenced data. For the first time since he had met Noah, there was something consistent there. "He's improving," he said, unable to hide his astonishment. "Not in peaks, in a steady line." Emily looked up. "What has changed?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He watched Emily hold her son, adjust her breathing, murmur almost inaudible words. It was automatic now, intuitive. "You've changed," he said. Emily took a while to understand. "Before, you reacted to fear," Daniel continued. "Now, you anticipate it, you control it." She looked at herself, as if only then realizing it. "I've learned to listen to him," she replied, "even when he's not crying." Overcoming the challenge didn't come in the form of a grand victory. It came in small, repeated details. Emily began regulating her own heart rate before touching her son, recognizing micro-tensions in his body before the monitors registered any changes. Without realizing it, she became an active part of his treatment. But growing up also required facing limitations. On the afternoon of the second day, Noah exhibited an unexpected response. Not a crisis, but a partial shutdown. His body relaxed too much. His vital signs slowly declined. "This isn't good," said Daniel, adjusting the sensors. "He's relying too much on you." Emily felt the weight of those words. "So I'm the problem now?" "No," Daniel replied. "You were the initial solution. But he needs to learn to regulate himself without you all the time." Emily swallowed hard. "He's just a baby." "And yet," Daniel said, "you're doing something extraordinary. But too extraordinary can become dangerous." Growing up required something painful, controlled distance. That night, Emily needed to step away for a few minutes while Daniel gradually introduced the stimuli. Noah reacted with discomfort. He didn't cry, but his body went on alert. Emily had to resist the urge to run to him. "Trust me," said Daniel, without taking his eyes off the data. Those were endless minutes. Then something changed. Noah took a deep breath. He adjusted himself. Without Emily touching him, Daniel's eyes widened. "He did it all by himself," he murmured. Emily felt the tears streaming down her face, but she didn't move. It wasn't abandonment, it was education. On the other side of town, the hospital was also growing, in the worst way. Dr. Levin faced questioning from superiors, requests for clarification, and veiled threats. The case had leaked, not with details, but enough to generate curiosity. It worked, and that infuriated him. Levin was not willing to lose. He began to push to revoke the court order, alleging imminent risk, illegal practice, and emotional manipulation by the mother. Meanwhile, Susan received a call that would change everything. "They're preparing a search warrant," she told Daniel, "not to bring the baby back, but to seize his information." Daniel remained silent. "If they take this," Susan continued, "it's all over. They bury the discovery. They turn you into a delusion." Emily heard everything. "Then we need proof," she said. "Something they can't erase." Daniel stared at her. "A public demonstration, or a flaw that's impossible to ignore," Emily added. The ultimate growth wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. On the morning of the third day, Noah demonstrated something unprecedented. He maintained complete stability for 6 consecutive hours. Without external stimuli, without constant contact, just balance. Daniel recorded everything: data, images, patterns. "This changes everything," he said. "If the hospital sees this—" "They won't see it," Emily interrupted. "Not the way we want them to." She stood up, feeling more confident than she had in weeks. "Let's show the world." Daniel then realized that he was no longer the one in control of the story. Emily had ceased to be just a mother fighting to save her son. She had become someone capable of taking on an entire system, and Noah, in the silence of his finally calm breathing, had done the unimaginable. She had learned to live. The decision to make the case public was not taken impulsively. On the contrary, every step was calculated with almost surgical precision. Emily understood now that it wasn't enough to be right. It had to be irrefutable. Daniel transformed the makeshift laboratory into a center of evidence. He organized data into clear sequences, compared previous hospital records with Noah's new patterns, and created timelines that showed something undeniable. The improvement was not random. It was progressive, reproducible, directly linked to the baby's neurological self-regulation. "They'll say it's a coincidence," Susan said, looking at the graphs, "or a placebo effect induced in the mother." "That's why we need witnesses," Emily replied. "People who can't be silenced." The first call was to an independent medical journalist known for investigating institutional abuses. The second was to a lawyer specializing in patient rights. The third was to a retired neuroscientist whom Daniel knew from his time at the research center. The clock was ticking against them. At the hospital, Dr. Levin accelerated his own preparations. The court order was almost ready, not to save Noah, but to protect the institution. Documents were reviewed, reports rewritten, terms like atypical response and temporary improvement replaced more dangerous words. "We can't let this become a spectacle," Levin said in a closed meeting. "If we make an exception, we lose control." Meanwhile, Noah continued to surprise. On the afternoon of the fourth day, he reacted to a completely new stimulus: absolute silence. Daniel turned off all artificial sounds, all rhythmic patterns. The baby did not have a meltdown. He adjusted his breathing on his own, as if he had learned to trust his own body. Emily watched, her heart heavy. "He doesn't need me all the time anymore," she said, with a mixture of pride and fear. "That's the point," Daniel replied. "He's ready." Ready for what? None of them said aloud. That night the messages started arriving. The journalist had confirmed his attendance. The lawyer had too. The neuroscientist asked to see everything in person. "Tomorrow," said Daniel. "At the latest, tomorrow night." Susan closed the door carefully. "The search order will be issued at dawn," he warned. "They'll come here first." The plan needed to happen sooner. Emily stayed awake all night beside Noah, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Each of her son's peaceful breaths was a silent victory. She knew the climax wouldn't just be a legal confrontation. It would be human. In the morning, the group gathered in the laboratory. The neuroscientist, Dr. Alan Reeves, observed the data in silence for several minutes. "This is no miracle," he finally said. "It's extreme neuroplasticity induced by regulated emotional bonding. Rare, but real." Daniel felt the weight of that validation. "They're going to try to destroy it," Reeves continued, "unless it's seen now." The journalist adjusted the camera. "Once we begin," he said, "there's no turning back." Emily looked at Noah. The baby opened his eyes, calm, alert. There was no fragility there. There was presence. "Then begin," she said. Before the recording could begin, sirens blared again, closer this time. It was no coincidence. The hospital had anticipated the situation. "They've arrived," Susan said. Daniel closed the laptop, protecting the data. "We can't delay any longer," he said. The building's door shook with loud banging. "Police, open up immediately." The journalist turned on the camera. Emily took a deep breath, positioning Noah so that everyone could see him. Alive, stable, impossible to deny. The preparation was complete. The final showdown would not take place in closed rooms or based on manipulated reports. It would be stopped in front of everyone. The knocking on the door wasn't just a warning, it was an ultimatum. "Police, open up now!" Daniel looked at Emily. There was no more time for hesitation. The journalist was already broadcasting live to an audience that was still small but growing every second. Comments appeared on the screen. Questions, indignation, curiosity. Susan opened the door. 2 police officers entered, accompanied by a court officer and a hospital representative. "Doctor." Levin followed closely behind, his face tense, his eyes fixed on Noah. "This is an illegal invasion," Susan said firmly. "We have a valid court order." The officer handed over the document. "The authorization was revoked 2 hours ago," he replied. "We are here to collect the minor and all the medical equipment." Emily felt her body go cold. "No," she said, stepping forward. "You're not going to touch it." Levin sighed, as if he had already expected resistance. "Emily, this has gone too far. You're putting your son at risk in front of the cameras. Be reasonable." The journalist moved the camera closer. "Dr. Levin," he said, "do you confirm that 15 doctors have declared this baby a lost cause?" Levin hesitated for a moment that was far too long. "The situation was irreversible at the time," he replied. Any improvement now is temporary. Daniel approached the monitor. Then explain this, he said, projecting the data onto a makeshift screen. Continuous neurological stability for more than 10 hours, without sedation, without artificial support. The neuroscientist, Dr. Reeves, entered the frame. I'm Alan Reeves, former director of the National Neuroscience Institute, he said, and I can affirm what we see here is a genuine adaptive response. To deny this is to deny basic science. The comments exploded. The bailiff raised his hand. Regardless, the order dictates that the baby be taken. Emily felt panic trying to overwhelm her. But something different happened. Noah stirred slightly. He opened his eyes. The monitor beeped once, not as an alert, but as an adjustment. Everyone looked. Daniel noticed it first. He's reacting to environmental stress, he murmured, but he's regulating himself. Emily knelt down, keeping her distance as she had been taught. Everything's all right, my love, she said without touching him. The signs have stabilized. Absolute silence. Even Levin seemed to lose his breath. That's not possible, he murmured. Yes, Reeves replied, and it's happening live. The officer hesitated. The police officers exchanged glances. The journalist turned the camera towards them. Are you going to remove a stable, conscious baby, monitored by specialists against the mother's will, in front of thousands of people? One of the police officers' radios started crackling. Central unit, the broadcast is going viral. Please wait for further instructions. Minutes passed. Each second felt like an eternity. The hospital representative spoke to Levin in a low voice. We need to end this, he whispered. Now. Levin took a deep breath and stepped forward. This procedure is unethical, he said loudly, and I, as the initial attending physician, demand an immediate transfer. Daniel stared at him. You gave up on him, he said. You signed his death warrant. Now you can't demand control over something you chose to abandon. Levin palideceu. That's defamation. No, the journalist replied. It's a public document. The broadcast now showed the old reports, with signatures, dates, and definitive conclusions. The bailiff received a call. He stepped away, listened in silence, and returned a changed man. The order is suspended, he announced, temporarily. Until further judicial review. Emily broke down in tears. But the real climax was yet to come. Noah, for the first time, made a sound, not a cry. A short, steady babble. The microphone picked it up. The audience went wild. Daniel choked. He never did that. Emily put her hand to her mouth. He is responding. Reeves smiled, visibly moved. This is the first sign of complete integration, he said. He's not just surviving, he's connecting. Levin took a step back, defeated, not by a court of law, but by the stark evidence before him. The sirens moved away, the broadcast continued. The world had seen. Dawn broke silently, as if the world had decided to hold its breath after what it had just witnessed. The broadcast had ended, but its echoes continued to spread. In hospitals, newsrooms, courts, and nursing homes, Noah's name began to be pronounced cautiously, not as a miracle, but as a question that no one could ignore anymore. Emily remained seated beside the makeshift crib. She didn't touch her son. She watched. Every tiny movement was now a silent confirmation that he was there, present, resisting on his own. For the first time since his birth, she felt no fear when she looked at the monitors. They no longer controlled her hope. Daniel reviewed the data in silence, not to prove anything to anyone, but to ensure that nothing there was misinterpreted. He knew that, from that moment on, every number would be used by defenders, critics, and opportunists. Science would not be kind. It never was. But it was fair to those who remained faithful to the facts. The hospital issued an official statement at dawn. The tone was neutral, carefully calculated. It acknowledged the need to review protocols and announced the opening of an internal investigation. No apology, no retraction, but for the first time there was no denial. Dr. Levin did not return. His name would surface days later, not in headlines, but in documents. Reports that pointed to hasty decisions, administrative pressures, statistics treated as definitive sentences. There was no arrest, no spectacle, just removal from office and silence. The court hearing took place a week later. Emily entered the room without photographers, without speeches. Noah remained under home observation, monitored remotely by 3 independent teams. None of them used the word cure. They used something more unsettling, unexpected, spontaneous evolution. The judge listened. He didn't interrupt. He wasn't impressed by graphs. He watched videos, the baby breathing on its own, adjusting, reacting to stimuli. In the end, he decided on something that seemed too simple for everything that had happened. Medical custody remained entirely with the mother. Any future intervention would depend on multidisciplinary consensus and express authorization. No exceptions. Emily left the forum without a smile. It wasn't a victory, it was a responsibility. The following weeks were marked by small, invisible victories. A hand movement, a postural adjustment, a brief sound. Nothing spectacular. All real. Daniel refused interviews. He published only 1 scientific article, without adjectives, without narrative. Just data, methodology, and a short final sentence. The absence of a response should not be confused with the absence of potential. The article was rejected twice before being accepted. When it was finally published, it provoked more discomfort than applause, but it opened up space. Other accounts emerged, forgotten cases, decisions reviewed. There was no revolution, there was a split. Emily began to live according to time, not the doctor's stopwatch, but her son's rhythm. She learned to wait without demanding, to care without controlling, to trust without abandoning vigilance. One morning, while organizing bottles and sensors, Noah held his finger, not by reflex, not by chance. She knew, not because someone said so, not because a graph confirmed it, but because they felt resistance, presence, choice. Emily cried silently. Outside, the world continued with its fragile certainties, but inside that room, something had been redefined. Not about medicine, not about miracles, regarding limits, and about the danger of believing that we already know everything. 2 years later, nobody called Noah a case anymore. He didn't run. He didn't talk like other children, but he recognized voices. He smiled intentionally. He had learned to hold light objects and to respond to his own name. Emily kept all the old reports in a simple box, not out of resentment, but as a reminder of what he had almost decided. Every night before going to sleep, she repeated the same phrase in a low voice, not as a challenge to science, but as an invitation to humility. We are still learning. If this story touched you, stop for a moment and reflect. How many decisions are made every day, as if there were no possibility of surprise? Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that boundaries aren't always final. Leave your comment. Do you believe that science should always have the last word, or that life still holds exceptions? Subscribe to the channel to continue following real stories that challenge certainties, awaken empathy, and remind us that there is still much